Я сказав, що включу.
It's October 6th. It's October 6th. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Chaparenko, and now we will be talking about current situation at the borders and checkpoints. Joining us in the studio is Andriy Demchenko, spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service. Good afternoon, Mr. Andriy. Good afternoon. My first question is about the checkpoint on the border with Romania. Today it was attacked with shaheds, and now it's closed. What's the situation over there? Can you give us a couple of comments? Well, the enemy continues inflicting strikes on the territory of Ukraine. Within the latest period, the border infrastructure was attacked too. Recently, there was a strike on the border infrastructure in Orlivka. Is the ferry crossing on the border with Romania? Fortunately, there were no casualties or serious damages of the border infrastructure, but unfortunately, there was a strike on the parking lot of the cargo trucks, which resulted in some of the trucks catching fire. All the relevant units were involved in stabilizing situation in that area. The works are underway, and due to the attack on this checkpost, unfortunately, the cross-border operations were suspended, and they will be resumed just as soon as it will be allowed by the security situation after mitigation of all the results of the attack on the checkposts. Remember the last attack on the border infrastructure on Orlivka on the 26th of September. We were able to resume the cross-border operation by the end of the day then, and I hope that today, by the end of the day, the border crossings will resume at this checkpost. Generally, all the vehicles that go in that direction are being forwarded to other checkposts, and we would like to kindly ask the citizens to pay attention to the information communicated by the State Border Guard Service about the suspension of operations. So please pick another checkpost, for example, Reni. So generally, what is the situation in the checkposts in the western part of Ukraine? Which are the directions with the most load and with the least load? Well, let me give you a little bit of statistics about the border crossings. We have data summarized for the 9 months of this year. The intensity of the passenger flow comparing to the relevant period of the last year increased 6%. For example, this year the border was crossed by 27,160,000 persons this year, and last year it was 25,600,000 persons. 13,300,000 people were crossing the border in the checkposts on the border with Poland, and this is more than 50% of the total passenger flow. The rest of the passenger flow falls on other checkposts. The transport intensity increased 7%, but talking about this moment, the passenger flow is quite dynamic, and comparing to the summer month, the intensity of the passenger flow decreases. In September, comparing to August, there was a 15% decrease. Also, that transport flow intensity decreased 5% too. In average, it's 85,000 people crossing the border per month in both directions, but talking about those vessel fluctuations during the weekends, the passenger flow may increase up to 110,000 people per day, and we don't see any figures either, I mean in terms of either exit or entrance prevailing, so the dynamic is quite equal. With intensification of the passenger flow during the weekends, obviously there may be an accumulation of transport because people keep coming at the same time, and this is why we advise everybody to use the resources of the State Border Guard Service, which updates the information about the workload on every checkpost in the western border, so you could pick the least busy checkpost, and this information is being updated every 3 hours, so please refer to the Telegram channel or the official website of the State Border Guard Service so you could pick the less busy checkpost to cross the border within the shortest period possible. So what is the situation in the checkposts in the border with Belarus and Russia? The situation is under control of the State Border Guard Service and other units of security and defense forces. We don't observe any accumulation of material or personnel of any units like Army of Belarus or Army of Belarus or the Russian mercenaries. As I mentioned before, Russia has withdrawn almost all of its units from Belarus, who were engaged in training in different polygons, and there were no rotation of new units, and we observed this situation for quite a long period. In the territory of Belarus there are still some Russian mercenaries, according to our information less than 1,000 persons. As we remember, that place where they were tried to be accepted, it was equipped for about 8,000 people, but the maximum number that we were able to document was a little bit more than 6,000 Russian mercenaries in Belarus. But again, even those who stay there now, they are more involved in training of Belarusian army units, and we don't see them as a significant threat. And on top of it, Russia don't has any forces in Belarus to stimulate some provocations or to prepare for any intrusion. But let's not underestimate the enemy. All of the security and defense forces who reinforce that direction, they are ready to counter any threat. And to improve it, we reinforce the defense lines all along the border with Belarus and Russia. We continue building fortifications to make sure we can efficiently control the border line, including by deployment of video surveillance and monitoring systems, use of unmanned aerial vehicles who monitor the borderline, and we equip proper quarters for deployment of Ukrainian security and defense forces in the border with Belarus. The situation is different in the border with Russia because the enemy keeps shelling the territory of Ukraine using MLRS, mortars, artillery, tanks, aviation. And only starting from the beginning of this month, our units documented more than 300 shellings of the territories of Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Sumy regions, and the most of the shellings fall on Sumy and Kharkiv regions. And apart from the enemy attempting to target the locations of deployment of Ukrainian armed forces and other security and defense forces, all those strikes, they impact civil infrastructure, they deteriorate the lives of the civilians. We see what's going on in Kharkiv region within the last couple of days. Unfortunately, the enemy continues terrorizing us on a daily basis. Well, the borders are closed with the enemy, but there is a humanitarian corridor in Sumy region, and so can you tell us about the number of people passing through this corridor on a daily basis when Russia doesn't block it? Well, we have to understand that all the checkposts on the border with Belarus and Russia are closed upon the decision of the Ukrainian government, but the Ukrainian bodyguard service will do everything they can to make sure that our citizens can safely come back home. So it's not only in Sumy region, but in other directions where the citizens of Ukraine can get to Ukrainian border. They will be led through to the territory of Ukraine. Obviously, there is a security component, and we see that the most people currently go through Sumy region, through one of the checkposts. They keep arriving at Ukrainian territory. In average, it can be about, say, 100 people per day who come back to the territories under Ukrainian control, who were forced to leave or from the temporarily occupied territories to get to the safer areas, and further on they will be provided with transportation to safer places away from the border, from where they may proceed to other parts of Ukraine. Thank you. I will give the floor to our colleagues. Good afternoon, Mr. Andriy, Maria Shenkarenko, Ukrinform. I have a couple of questions to you. As we know, according to the new legislation, some categories of the women, specifically those working in the medical area, have to be registered by the military conscription offices. So can you please tell us, there is a lot of different information. Is it real that as soon as those women are registered by conscription offices, they will be restricted to cross the border? Well, a lot of attention is being paid to this topic. In September last year, there was a discussion about the registration of women by the conscription offices, and back then the State Bodyguard Service explained that it puts no restriction on the women in terms of crossing the border. So the rules have not changed for them. They are not restricted in crossing the state border. So I'm reminding you once again that this restriction applies to the men, the citizens of Ukraine aged 18 to 60. All those categories are strictly listed by the decree of the government number 57. There is a list of men who are allowed to cross the border too, who are exempt from restriction. And also, this restriction applies for government officials, which are again strictly described in the decree number 57, and it applies to both men and women. So if a person is in some of those offices that are listed in decree 57, they can only cross the border if they go to visit their minor kids or accompany their minor kids for their travel abroad, or to go on a business trip. Thank you very much. You've just touched upon the topic of the government officials. So is there any information about the number of government officials who were trying to cross the border without relevant reasons? I can add that upon the decision of the government, when this category of persons was amended, it was clearly specified that the state bodies are supposed to submit the lists to the State Bodyguard Service of those officials who fall under those positions, and the servicemen of the State Bodyguard Service control crossing of the border by those government officials. More than 2,000 people were not led through the border who were government officials who were trying to leave the country based upon conditions other than those specified by the decree number 57. Like I mentioned, either accompanying their minors or going on a business trip. Mr. Andriy, thank you very much for informing us about the situation in the borders of Ukraine, and Ukraine Media Center will continue its operation on Monday. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us.